Craig's voice had been climbing for the last 3 sentences, and the shop had gone quiet the way shops go when something is happening that nobody wants to be part of. The 2 mechanics at the far bay found reasons to look at the underside of a Cherokee. Pete, under the pickup at the next station, had gone completely still. "Do you know what our margin looks like right now?" Craig was pointing at Dex, at the lot, at the direction the Honda Civic had gone. "That was $112 we don't have, and you just handed it out the door. I have been carrying this shop on decisions other people won't make." "Your father's shop," Pete said quietly. Craig's color changed. "You're done," he said to Dex. "Today." Right now. Dex set down the socket wrench. He reached into the front pocket of his coveralls and took out a smaller one, consumer grade, the words "Best Mechanic" stamped into the handle, in the slightly uneven way of something mass-produced, trying to feel personal. He held it for a moment, then put it in his pants pocket. He unzipped the coveralls, stepped out of them, and folded them over the back of a chair. "Thank you for the 7 years," he said to Craig. Craig's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Dex picked up his jacket and walked out. Behind him, the air compressor continued. In the waiting area near the bay door, an old woman in a cotton jacket stood very straight, watching him cross the lot. Her hand had tightened around the strap of her purse. Pete was the only one who saw it. He drove home on streets he had driven for 4 years without thinking about them. He parked in the same spot. He went up the stairs and unlocked the door and stood in the kitchen and did not do anything in the kitchen. The apartment had a particular quality of empty between the time he arrived home and the time Willa got off the school bus. Temporary quiet, with a definite end point. He had learned to read it like a weather condition, something to wait through, not fight. He went to the floor, sliding down with his back against the lower cabinet, knees up, looking at the underside of the kitchen table from an angle he did not normally have access to. From this position he could see, on the underside of one of the chairs, a small piece of packing tape. Willa had put it there when she was 6. The reason had never been explained. He had noticed it shortly after, and had not removed it, and had never mentioned it to her. It had been there for 3 years, and would probably be there for 30 more. The list organized itself without him trying. Rent was due in 18 days. Willa's school supplies needed replenishing. She was down to 1 working pencil, and a highlighter she was rationing carefully. His mother in Fresno needed the monthly transfer, $300 on the 12th of every month. Not a lot, but consistent, and the consistency was what mattered to her. He had enough saved to cover 2 months, maybe 3 if he was careful about groceries and deferred the truck's oil change. The truck's rear tire was also showing wear. Willa would need new shoes before winter. Her feet had grown since September, which he had noticed and not yet acted on. His own work boots had a seam coming loose on the left one that he had been resealing with adhesive for 2 months. He was good at fixing things that could be fixed with what he had. The list of things in that category was getting shorter. After a certain point, the math stopped working, and he ran the numbers again and got the same answer. Outside, a car passed on the street. The refrigerator cycled. Someone 2 floors up had a television going at the volume of someone who lived alone and saw no reason to keep it down. At 3:42, the key turned in the lock. Willa came in and dropped her backpack by the door the way she always did. She looked at him on the floor. Her expression registered nothing unusual. She went to the cabinet above him, found the instant noodles, filled the kettle, and set it on the burner. She moved around him without asking him to move, and he did not move. 10 minutes later, she set a bowl on the floor in front of him and sat down across from it with her own. The noodles were too salty. They always were. "Bad day," she said. "Complicated day." She ate. She did not push. The ability to not push was something she had possessed since she was very small, and he had never entirely understood whether it was temperament or learned, or some combination without a name. "I lost the job," he said, "but we're okay. I'll figure it out." She processed this for a moment, the brief stillness, the slight adjustment in her expression. "Pete still there?" she said. "Yeah." "Good," she said. She said it the way you say something when it is the important part. Maybe it was. The noodles were too salty, and the kitchen floor was harder than it looked, and Willa turned a page in her mind, the way she turned pages in her notebook deliberately, without fuss, and went on eating. Eleanor Sutherland called her daughter at 8:47 that evening, which was not her usual time. Lane noticed this before she answered, because her mother called at predictable intervals for predictable reasons, and 8:47 on a Monday was neither. "I want to tell you something," Eleanor said. She told it the way she always told things from the beginning, without skipping, without editorializing. The Honda Civic pulling into the lot that morning. The rough idle she had been ignoring for 8 months, because the estimate at the last shop had seemed unreasonable. The man who slid out from under a Silverado and wiped his hands and said the car would tell him what was wrong. Give him a few minutes. She described the way he worked, not anxiously, not performatively, but with the concentration of someone who found the problem genuinely interesting. He had not asked for the car's history. He had listened to it run. She had asked how long he had been doing this, and he said since he was 17, his uncle had a shop, and she had asked if he liked it, and he said he liked that things either worked or they did not. No argument about it. She told Lane about the compressor. She told her the price reasonable. Exactly what it should have been. She told her about reaching into her bag and not finding the wallet, and the particular quality of embarrassment that comes not from being caught, but from genuinely having made a careless mistake and not wanting that mistake to cost someone else something. She told her about holding her hand in front of the cold air vent for the first time in 8 months, how she had stood there longer than she needed to. She told her what he said. "Don't worry about it. It's done. Drive carefully." And then he went back to the truck he had been working on. Before she finished thanking him, she told her about the man who came out of the office. The voice climbing by the sentence. The $112. The 7 years. The coverall folded over the chair back rather than thrown down, the small wrench going into the pants pocket, the way the man said thank you to the person who was firing him, and the way that person had not been able to say anything back. Lane had not interrupted. She sat in her home office in Richmond, with her feet flat on the floor, and listened to all of it. "What was his name?" she said, when her mother finished. Eleanor paused. "There was an invoice on the counter. The other man threw it back down when I tried to pay. The name on it was Dexter Calloway." Lane was quiet for a moment. "All right," she said. "Thank you for calling, Mom." After she hung up, she opened her laptop. The Sutherland Trades Foundation had been searching for a program lead for the technical training division for 8 months. She had interviewed 11 candidates, none of them wrong, exactly, none of them right, either. There was a quality she was looking for that was difficult to name in a listing, and the difficulty of naming it meant she was also having difficulty recognizing it in the room. She navigated to the candidate management system and scrolled until she found the name, Dexter Calloway, former Army. 14 years of practical mechanical experience, most recently Marrow Garage in Beckford. No college degree. Her coordinator Sandra had flagged it. Lacks credentials for senior instruction role. She read the application through once. She thought about the quality she had been failing to find for 8 months. Then she read it again. She closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a while, thinking about a man folding his coveralls over a chair back and saying thank you to the person who had just fired him. Pete Raines had the number in his phone because Eleanor Sutherland had left a card at the shop 2 years ago after a routine brake job and said, "If you are ever looking for something different, this foundation does good work." Pete had filed it under things he was not going to act on but did not quite throw away. Most people had a category like that. Numbers saved in phones that never got called. Possibilities held open without commitment. The way you leave a window cracked on a day that might turn warm. He looked at the card that night, sitting in his truck in the empty lot, after everyone had gone home. He thought about Dex's coveralls on the chair. He thought about the wrench, the small consumer-grade wrench that Dex used every single day instead of the better ones right there in the toolbox, and why he used it, and the fact that he had never explained why. He thought about 7 years of arriving at 6:50 when the posted start time was 7:30. He thought about $112 and a woman who had held her hand in front of a cold air vent for the first time in 8 months. and what her face had looked like when the cold air came through. He called the number. It rang 4 times. A woman answered. Clear voice. No warm-up. This is Lane Sutherland. My name is Pete Rains, he said. I work at Marrow Garage in Beckford. Or I did. Today something happened there that I think you should know about. He described it without editorializing. He described the Honda Civic and the wallet, and what Dex had said and what Craig had said after. He described the wrench. He described the way the coverall had been folded and placed on the chair rather than thrown down, a detail most people would not have noticed, but which Pete had noticed because he had worked alongside Dex Calloway for 7 years and understood what that kind of detail meant about a person. You're looking for the right person, Pete said. You just watched them fire him. He hung up. Across town, Dex was in his bedroom with his shoes still on, which was something he only did when he was too tired to take them off. The small wrench was on the nightstand. He was not lying awake running the numbers. He had run them earlier and set the problem aside for the night, the way you set aside something that will still be there in the morning and will not improve from further examination in the dark. That was a skill he had learned slowly, over years. The difference between useful thinking and the kind that just wore a groove. In Richmond, Lane Sutherland sat at her desk at 11:17 at night and looked at Pete's number on her phone. She took a red pen from the cup on her desk and looked at Sandra's note on the printed application. Lacks credentials for senior instruction role. She looked at the line. Then she drew a single horizontal stroke through it, not angry. Just finished with it. She thought about a man saying thank you on his way out the door. She thought about what it had cost him. She thought about the fact that he had said it anyway. She called Sandra's voicemail. Set up an interview, she said. Don't use my name. The lot was completely empty now. His was the only truck. Somewhere across town, Dex was asleep with his shoes on and a wrench on his nightstand. Tomorrow he would wake up and the problem would still be there, and he would do what he did, work the problem, one part at a time. Pete knew this. It was why he had made the call. The call came the next morning at 8:43. Dex was at the kitchen table with coffee he had made too strong, watching Willa work through a bowl of cereal across from him. The number on the screen was unfamiliar. He answered. The woman identified herself as Sandra, calling from the Sutherland Trades Foundation regarding a position that had come open, professional and specific. The referral was confidential. Would he be available Thursday at 2 in the afternoon? He looked at Willa. She had looked up from her cereal and was watching him with the patience of someone who has learned that eavesdropping on half a conversation is less useful than waiting for the summary. Yes, he said. I can come in. Willa looked at him with a question. He shook his head slightly. Later, she went back to her cereal. He spent part of the morning looking up the foundation. Not the tax filings, not the donor lists, just the history. He found a short biography of the founder on the organization's website. Robert Sutherland, born 1953 in Staunton, Virginia, trained as a diesel mechanic in his 20s, spent 3 decades doing engine work, large trucks, construction equipment, the kind of machines that do not forgive careless diagnosis. He had founded the Sutherland Trades Foundation in 2011 and died 8 months later, at the age of 58. Dex read that detail and sat with it for a moment. The man had known what the 8 months were and had used them to build something anyway. There was a specific kind of clarity, in that the clarity of someone who had stopped spending time on the wrong things. The foundation's purpose was providing technical vocational training to young people who lacked access to traditional pathways. People without the money for trade school, or without the family background that made trade school feel like a real possibility. The stated philosophy was simple. A skill taught well is a door opened permanently. Dex read that part twice. Thursday, he drove down from Beckford and gave himself time. The building was 3 stories of old brick on a street of similar buildings in a part of Richmond, in the middle of becoming something more expensive, with uneven results. The sign was small. He sat in the truck for a moment before going in, not from hesitation, just the habit of arriving somewhere and taking a reading before entering. Inside, the receptionist was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain. She said his name before he reached the desk. Mr. Calloway, Mrs. Sutherland said you'd be coming. She looked at him steadily, with the directness of someone who has been told to pay attention. She's rarely wrong about people. He filed that sentence and followed her down the hallway. The hallway was lined with photographs, job sites, classrooms, people in work gear beside engines and panels and framing. Near the end, one stopped him, a man in his 40s, standing beside a large diesel engine with one hand resting on the block. Robert Sutherland, 1989. He was grinning at whoever held the camera, the specific grin of someone who has just solved something and knows it. Dex looked at it for a moment. Then he went into the interview room. Willa finished her cereal and put the bowl in the sink and picked up her backpack. She paused in the kitchen doorway. He had not looked up from his phone, but he felt her stop. That was another thing about her, the pauses that were not quite questions. She did not say anything. She went to school. He continued reading. There was a philosophy to the work that Robert Sutherland had left behind that was hard to put into a single sentence, which was probably why the foundation had not tried. You did not describe it. You built it, incrementally, with people who did not yet know what they were building, until the day they looked up from a workbench and understood that they had built something. The first part of the interview was with a man named Thomas, program director, early 30s, the calm directness of someone comfortable with what he was doing. He started with the technical questions without preamble, which Dex appreciated. What was the primary diagnostic difference between a gas and diesel engine in terms of compression failure? What was the most common misdiagnosis he had seen come through a shop? What were the two most important things a first-year mechanic needed to understand before touching a diagnostic tool? Dex answered without reaching for the impressive-sounding version. The compression question he answered in terms of what you heard and felt before you measured anything, the rhythm of a diesel struggling versus a gas engine with similar symptoms, how RPM behavior differed under load. The misdiagnosis question he answered with a specific example. Sensor codes that pointed at components that were not actually failing, and mechanics who replaced the component without asking what had made the sensor read wrong in the first place. The fix looked complete. The underlying cause remained. The car came back in 6 weeks. The two most important things before a diagnostic tool, Dex said, are the same two things you need before any instrument. Know what the thing is supposed to do, and know what it sounds and feels like when it's doing it right. The tool confirms what you already know, or it tells you you're wrong. Either way, you need to already know something for the tool to mean anything. Thomas made a note. And if you're teaching someone with no background at all, where do you start? One thing, Dex said. One component. What it is, what it does, what it sounds like healthy, and what it sounds like sick. Not a system apart. The system becomes visible once you understand enough parts to see how they connect. And someone who has learned incorrect technique? Harder, Dex said. The wrong technique still works enough of the time. You cannot just tell them it's wrong, their daily experience argues against you. You have to get them to the moment when it fails. That is the only thing that actually changes the habit. The failure has to happen where they can see it, and they need to understand exactly why. Thomas closed his notebook partway, not winding down, no longer needing to take notes. One more, Thomas said. In a shop, you solve the problem and move to the next one. Teaching means slowing down to the pace of someone who doesn't know what you know. Does that frustrate you? Dex looked at the table for a moment. No, he said. What frustrates me is a problem with no solution. In a classroom, the problem always has a solution. It's a matter of time and repetition. That's the easiest kind of problem there is. Thomas set his pen down. He looked at Dex with the expression of someone arriving at the end of a question they had been working on for some time. Then the door at the back of the room opened. Dex heard footsteps before he turned, flat soles on a hard floor, not sneakers, not heels. He turned. The woman who came through the door was not Eleanor Sutherland. She was around 33, in a navy blazer with her hair pulled back, and she came into the room the way a person comes into a room they have walked into many times. She looked at Dex. He looked back. He knew her from somewhere. Not from a meeting. From the edge of a scene rather than its center. The Volvo. Gray sedan, parked outside the garage on Monday morning while Eleanor's Civic was inside. A figure in the passenger seat. Window up. He had glanced over while walking to the supply cabinet, and the figure had turned away, not startled. Just turned, and he had moved on and not thought about it again. He was thinking about it now. Thomas excused himself quietly and left. The woman came around the table and sat down across from Dex. She set her hands flat on the surface and looked at him with the same quality of attention her mother had used in the garage, not pressuring, not testing, just present. He looked at the nameplate on the desk. Lane Sutherland, CEO. You were in the car, he said. Yes. You saw what happened. Yes. You didn't say anything. No. He waited. If I had stepped out, she said. If Craig had backed down because of who I am, I would never have known whether what I saw was actually you or a performance you were capable of for an audience. The test needed real consequences. That is the only kind of information that is reliable. Dex sat with that. It cost me a job, he said. I know. 7 years of reference. I know that too. The room was quiet. Through the window, the street moved at its ordinary pace, a delivery van at the curb, a woman with a stroller. The unremarkable Tuesday movement of a city going about itself. Sutherland, he said. His daughter. A pause. Dex glanced toward the hallway, then back. I saw the photograph. He was a diesel mechanic. He loved the big engines. Something shifted in her expression, not warmth exactly, but the territory just adjacent to it. He used to say that anything you could fix without standing on something wasn't interesting enough. He kept a stepladder in every shop he ever worked in, even when he didn't need one for the job at hand. Dex reached into his pants pocket and set the small wrench on the table between them. Best mechanic, stamped into the handle. 14 months of daily use had given the metal a different quality than it had at the beginning, not worn. Worked. The difference was specific and mattered. My daughter bought this, he said. She used 3 months of her allowance. Not from a gift set, she bought this one separately, because she had seen me use a wrench that size and wanted me to have one that was mine. She asks me most mornings if I have it with me. I always do. Lane looked at the wrench for a long moment. She did not pick it up. She did not say anything, but she looked at it the way you look at something when it has told you more than words could have managed, and when you are not quite ready to look away from it yet. She sat across from him, in a room that had absorbed other conversations, the ones between Thomas and candidates who had been almost right, the ones between board members about budgets, the particular kind of silence that settles into meeting rooms after difficult decisions. Dex could feel the history of the room without being able to name it. He understood buildings the way he understood machines, not by being told, but by listening to what they were doing. He did not know yet what to do with the information that Lane Sutherland had been sitting in that car, watching, deciding. He was not angry. He had worked through anger in the first minute and come out the other side into something more complicated, something that was partly recognition, partly respect, partly a reluctance to give the feeling a name before it had finished becoming whatever it was going to become. He could sit across from someone and feel that. That was something he had learned from 7 years of repair work. You did not name the problem before you understood it. He called Sandra the next morning and asked if there was somewhere he and Lane could meet that was not the foundation. She gave him a coffee shop on Clement Street that she described as having been there long enough to be reliable. He arrived first. He ordered 2 coffees. He had called Pete the previous evening to ask how Lane took hers, and Pete had answered on the second ring and given him the information without asking why, which was characteristic. Pete was a person who understood the difference between questions you answered and questions you asked back, and over 7 years had sorted that distinction with consistent accuracy. She came in 3 minutes after him. She saw the cup waiting. She sat down. Pete, she said. Pete, he confirmed. She put her hands around the cup. Outside the window, Clement Street moved at its unhurried weekday pace, slightly foggy at the edges, the kind of weather that made no demands on anyone. The city moved at its own pace, indifferent to the people in the coffee shop and their particular histories. Can I ask you something about your father? Dex said. She looked at the window for a moment. Yes. What would he have made of all this? He meant the interview, the process, the testing, the car in the parking lot, all of it. Something shifted in her expression, amusement, and underneath it something older. He would have been annoyed, she said. He didn't have patience for process. He would have talked to you for 20 minutes about diesel diagnostics and decided. Was he usually right? About people. She picked up her coffee. Almost always. They were quiet for a moment. Outside, the fog was thinning at the edges of the morning. He would have known in 20 minutes about the valve timing argument, Dex said. She looked at him. Which argument? 2 of your students, coming out of Thomas's classroom yesterday, arguing about valve timing on the way out. Both wrong, in different directions. One will figure it out on his own. The other one needs someone to walk him to the failure point before he'll see it. She was quiet for a moment. You know that from watching them argue in a hallway? I know it from how they argued, Dex said. That is different from a session. Something changed in her expression. Then, without having decided to, she smiled, not the careful professional kind, the real kind, the one that reached her eyes and happened before the decision to smile had fully been made. He would have liked you, she said. He was never impatient with people who paid attention, only with people who didn't. The room held the quiet of a place that had absorbed a lot of conversations. You haven't apologized, Dex said. She looked at him steadily. No, I'm not asking you to. He wrapped both hands around his cup. I just wanted you to know I noticed. I know you noticed. A pause. And it turns out that's enough. He looked at her. She looked back. And neither of them looked away. The coffee shop around them continued at its own pace. A man at the counter ordered something complicated, and the barista made it without apparent effort. A woman near the window had papers spread across the table and was reading with the focused stillness of someone who had successfully blocked out the rest of the room. The ordinary contained world of a Tuesday morning in a neighborhood that did not know or care about the particular convergence happening at this table. Dex thought about his uncle's shop. The way his uncle had known, within about 20 minutes of meeting a new mechanic, whether that person was going to work out. He had never explained the method. He had just said, watch how they touch the tools. You learn more from that than from anything they tell you. He looked at his coffee cup. I'll take the job, he said. Lane waited. Not because of what happened at the garage, not because of the interview, or because I owe you anything for how it went. He looked across the table at her. Because what you are building here, teaching people who don't have a way in, that is work worth doing. That is the only reason. I know, she said. That's the only reason I'm offering it. They sat with that for a moment. Outside, the streetcar bell rang somewhere down the block. The fog had burned off completely, and the morning was pressing itself against the windows in the way of a day that had decided to be something. People on the sidewalk moved, with the slightly increased purposefulness of weather that had cleared. Lane asked about Willa, not the way a person asks about a detail they need to file, leaning forward slightly, hands still around the cup. The question offered the way a person asks when they genuinely want the answer. He told her about the noodle bowls on the kitchen floor, the tape on the underside of the chair that had been there for 3 years and would probably be there for 30 more. The way Willa had said good when he told her Pete was still at the shop, as if that were the piece of information that settled everything. He told her about Willa moving around him on the kitchen floor without asking him to move, setting the bowl down in front of him and sitting across from it with her own 9 years old, already fluent in the difference between what needed to be said and what just needed to be present. Lane laughed. Not the polite acknowledgement of something meant to be charming, but a real laugh, the kind that uses the whole face, that happens before the decision to laugh has been fully made. It changed the quality of the room briefly, the way real laughter does, opening something in it that had been slightly closed. She sounds like she's going to be fine, Lane said. She's already fine, Dex said. She's been fine for a while. I'm the one still catching up. Lane looked at him. That's not a bad position to be in, she said. Having someone ahead of you. He thought about the tape under the chair, about the bowl set on the floor without comment, about Willa's question most mornings and the answer that was always the same, about what it meant to be the person catching up to a 9-year-old, the specific, unironic privilege of it. No, he said, it's not. He picked up the wrench from the table between them. He had placed it there without thinking, The way you put down something you carry everywhere and returned it to his pocket. She watched him do it. She did not say anything about it, but he thought she filed it the way she filed things. Carefully, in the right place, for later. The way her father had probably filed things. The specific inheritance of people who paid attention. Outside the window, the streetcar went past again in the other direction, its bell a brief announcement of its own continuing existence. Dex watched it go. There was something clarifying about having made the decision. It was not the relief of having a job again, though that was part of it. It was the specific clarity of knowing that the reason for the decision was the right reason. He had not taken the job because he needed it, though he did. He had not taken it because of guilt or gratitude or the pressure of obligation. He had taken it because the work mattered. That distinction would probably not matter to most people. It mattered to him. It had always mattered to him, more than he had ever been able to explain to anyone, including himself. The first cohort had 8 students, none older than 25, none with prior mechanical experience. Dex had asked for this specifically, and Thomas had looked at him with something between skepticism and genuine curiosity, then written it into the program parameters without further argument. Dex had thought about how his uncle had taught him, not by explaining first and then demonstrating, but by putting him next to the machine and letting the machine be the first teacher. The machine had no patience or impatience. It just had the problem, and the problem was either solved or it was not. Everything else was in the way. Day 1. He carried an old engine block from the storage room and put it on the work table and stepped back. He said nothing. He let the room do what rooms do when no one is speaking, gather itself, grow uncomfortable, start looking for a way out of the silence. 8 people looked at the block, then at each other, then at him, and he looked back and did not help them. After about 45 seconds, a girl near the back, she had written her name as Keely on the intake form, small letters, no capitals, said, "What is that?" "What do you think it is?" Dex said. "An engine." "Part of one." Which part? Nobody knew. Nobody pretended to know. He counted that as a good sign. "Good," he said. "Nobody's learned the wrong thing yet." At the far end of the table, a kid in a gray sweatshirt laughed small, quickly covered. Dex looked at him and nodded once. The kid stopped covering it. That was enough to begin. The first week was slow. The second was less slow. He had them close their eyes and identify components by touch, not to make it harder, but because the hands sometimes knew things the eyes got in the way of. By the end of the 3rd week, Keely could name 7 components without looking. By the 4th week, she was at 9, which was 4 more than Dex had expected at that point, and 1 more than he himself had managed when he was first learning. On the last Friday of that 4th week, Dex sat in his truck in the empty lot after everyone had gone home and did not start the engine right away. The building was quiet behind him. The afternoon had gone gray in the way October afternoons went gray in Richmond, without drama. Just the light stepping back gradually from the surfaces of things. He picked up his phone, typed to Willa, "Not yet. You okay?" 3 dots. Then, obviously, "Are you okay?" He looked at the screen for a moment. "Yeah. Actually." She sent back a thumbs up and nothing else. She always knew the difference between things that needed words and things that needed only the fact of a response. He sat in the lot a while longer, not from reluctance, not from sadness. He was waiting for something to finish settling. There was a thing that had shifted over the past weeks, and he was giving it time to find its position before he drove home. He took the small wrench out of his pocket and held it for a moment. Best mechanic. He put it back, started the engine, and went home. The thing that had shifted was still settling. That was fine. Some things needed a little more time. 6 months later, on a Thursday afternoon with no particular significance, Willa had a school holiday and came with Dex to the foundation. She sat in the corner of the classroom with her homework while he taught. The students had long since stopped treating her presence as noteworthy. She was simply part of the room. The session ran until 3:15. Dex was working through a valve timing question with 2 students when he looked up and saw Lane Sutherland standing in the doorway. She had not called ahead. She was wearing a jacket he hadn't seen before, dark green, a similar cut to the cotton jacket her mother favored. She stood in the doorway and looked into the room. The engine parts on the work tables, the diagrams on the whiteboard, the students sorting their bags. Willa in the corner with her notebook open. Willa saw her. She put down her pencil and walked to the door with the directness she applied to most things, no ceremony. Just movement toward a decided destination. Dex watched from across the room. He could not hear what they said. He watched Willa say something. Watched Lane listen and respond. Watched Willa say something shorter, and watched Lane go very still, the specific stillness of someone asked something they were not prepared to answer. Willa turned and walked back into the room. She went to the corner where the extra chairs were stacked, selected one nearly as tall as she was, and carried it to the doorway. She set it down beside Lane without a word. Then she walked back to her corner, picked up her pencil, and resumed her homework. In the month since Dex had started at the foundation, Craig had lost 2 more mechanics and sold the garage before the quarter ended. Pete had found a position at a shop closer to his apartment. Dex's rent was current. The transfer to Fresno had gone out on the 12th, as it always did. Willa had a new set of colored pencils and a graphing calculator she had wanted, and he had been in a position to get it for her. The October light came through the windows at a low angle and reached the work tables in long stripes. It reached the chair in the doorway. Lane Sutherland sat down. Inside, one of the students asked Dex a question about the diagram. He turned to the whiteboard, drew something, answered, and turned back. Willa turned a page. In the doorway, Lane sat and listened to all of it, the technical back and forth, the sound of a room where something real was being learned. He had fixed her mother's car for free on a Monday in October, for no reason except that her mother had done nothing wrong. He had folded his coveralls over a chair and said thank you to the man who fired him, and walked out with a wrench in his pocket and a daughter at home who would set a bowl of noodles on the floor in front of him without being asked. He had done all of it before he knew any of it would matter. That was the part she had needed to know. That was the part that had turned out to be true. He had fixed her mother's car for free. He had no idea who she was. It turned out that was exactly why it mattered.